We're joined by Max Keiser, stockbroker turned activist, who predicts America's on a slippery slope to economic collapse. Thanks for joining us. What do you think of America's national debt levels?
Levels are outrageous, and the way that the America can get away with it is by maintaining the world reserve currency is a big part of the American hegemony or the American empire. You know, when America writes checks or creates bonds to other countries, when those bonds are due, America just creates more bonds. So it's what some call an extraordinary privilege. And this is why countries like Russia, China are looking to divorce themselves from the U.S. dollar. They're doing more deals amongst themselves, more bilateral deals in their local currencies and the regional currencies. And this is ultimately, America is a debt-aholic.
What are the consequences of America's national debt?
Well, I think it's in the works right now, some kind of gold bullion-backed currency. And it's not, the implications for the U.S. are not great because they have this huge debt. So they would be forced to pay off their debt in, not by just inflating themselves out of the problem by creating more paper. If the rest of the world becomes more competitive and the rest of the world starts adopting real sound currencies, the U.S. would also be forced to be competitive to some degree, greater than they currently are. And in a real, let's say, fair, competitive race, the U.S. has the weakest currency. You know, if the global economic and business game is a game of poker, the U.S. is holding a terrible hand.
What do you think about the Federal Reserve getting more powers from the Obama administration when many blame the Fed for the crisis?
No, to use the alcoholic metaphor, that's like giving the alcoholic more to drink. Hank Paulson and his successor, Tim Geithner, are part of the financial oligarchy. They're part of the banking oligarchy. Their interests are not the same as the interests of American citizens. Their interests are part of a global banking group, a global banking cartel. The same group of bankers all over the world seek to keep interest rates as low as possible, to make it as easy for them to borrow as possible, because they know when they make a bad bet, their respective governments bail them out with taxpayer money. It's really a war. There's a global war going on. It's the war between investors versus speculators. Anyone who's trying to invest money and get a decent return or work to make a decent wage is being squeezed out or pushed out by the speculators who have access to cheap money through political connections.
Do you believe the American bailout is a form of protectionism?
Well, it's not free market capitalism. It's an industrial policy. It's a policy of the government wanting to get into every nook and cranny of the business sector, because the people who are in politics and in business want the cheapest possible access to money that's possible, and they don't want to compete. So the easiest way not to compete is to get the government to do business with the government, who has the ability to raise taxes, to confiscate wealth, to wage wars. So it's not a coincidence that the primary GDP boosting activities of America are war, which services the war councils that are on the board of directors of these banks and in Washington, and cheap consumerism and consuming foreign-made goods, slave-made goods in other countries. And again, with the U.S., it's great if you have the world reserve currency, and everyone needs to buy U.S. dollars to conduct their business. And this is why countries like Russia and China and Iran and Brazil are trying to divorce themselves away from the U.S. because it's a completely toxic currency that's just rife with accounting fraud. It supports an empire that is too lazy to compete, and the way that they make their money is through cheap consumption and war and prisons. And the rest of the world is saying, you know, we want to move on from this model. We want to do something a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more capitalistic, a little bit more dynamic.
What's going to happen to this shadow banking system if it keeps going unchecked?
What will happen is there's going to be a currency revaluation across the globe. The dollar will be cut in probably be cut in half versus its other major trading currencies. Well, gold in particular will have to be, as it was in the 30s, valued upward. So gold and precious metals and any currency that brings in a basket of commodities or precious metals as the basis of that currency will, in concert, you're going to see a revaluation of gold bullion, I believe. And you can see the price of gold move up 50–60% in one day or 1 week, or it could move up 100% in a week. This means that all currencies are going to be revalued against gold, and the currency that stands to lose the most would be the U.S. dollar. So therefore, and people wake up in America, which is, as has happened in other countries like Iceland recently, or other bailout countries from the IMF, or in Russia, or in the UK in the 70s. And suddenly they wake up and it's like, oh, our currency was devalued by 50%. We're now being bailed out by the IMF and the World Bank. Everything at the store costs double or triple or quadruple. And there's nothing they can do about it. Because it's not like this thing's happening without a careful, coordinated plan by the banking establishment around the world that's setting this all up to go when it needs to go. It's going to be relatively effortless on their part. Like when Europe embraced the euro, think about this new currency grid happening pretty quickly, and all currencies, most of the trading currencies having a new relative value versus commodity basket of commodities. Of course, the U.S. is not going to be happy about it, but most of the major wealth in the U.S. will be outside of the U.S. by then.